Number 10. Sigara. Starting off the list today is the ancient rock city of Sigara, located in present-day Sri Lanka. What's really amazing about this lost city is that it's built into a giant rock. It's an ancient city literally carved into a massive stone that rises about 600 feet above the ground in the middle of an otherwise flat and uninteresting landscape. Ever since foreigners have stepped foot on the island nation of Sri Lanka, the lost city of Sigara has baffled them. It was designated as a Cultural World Heritage Site in 1982, and it is still an important location for research and archaeology. The ancient city is steeped in mystery and intrigue. Most historians agree that the areas surrounding Sigara had been inhabited ever since prehistoric times. This means the giant rock had been used as shelter for 5,000 years. But even though our ancient ancestors may have taken shelter there, the city of Sigara became truly famous in the 5th century, when it was transformed into a magical place. King Kashyapa transformed the enormous rock into a fortress and pleasure garden. This is the same king who assassinated his father and stole the throne from his brother. Because King Kashyapa feared that there would be a retaliation against him for stealing the throne and committing patricide, he decided to live inside the fortified palace high up on the giant rock. He made Sigara an impenetrable fortress. But even still, this ancient city was overrun and defeated in 495. The rightful heir destroyed his brother and took the throne. And the city of Sigara was transformed into a monastery for Buddhist monks, where it operated up until the 14th century before fading into the history books. Number 9. Sanchi. Sanchi is an ancient lost city from India. It has an impressive history, stretching back at least 1,000 years. The city had its origins in the 3rd century BC, and construction continued all the way until the 11th century. The city was ultimately abandoned in the 13th century after the death of Buddhism in India, and Sanchi then remained empty and neglected until it was rediscovered in 1818 by a British officer. The most famous part of this immense Buddhist complex is its great stupa, located at the very top of the tallest hill in Sanchi town. It's considered to be one of the oldest stone structures in all of India, and it was the first major piece of Sanchi to be built in the 3rd century by Emperor Ashoka. Furthermore, the Great Stupa was allegedly constructed at the very place where the emperor's wife was born. Sanchi has 4 decorated gateways, each one facing a cardinal direction and depicting various life events from the Lord Buddha. Sanchi was once considered to be one of the most important Buddhist locations in all of ancient India, and the fact that such an important place was abandoned goes to show just how completely the majority of the country gave up on Buddhism hundreds of years ago in favor of Hinduism. Number 8. Pompei. Pompei is definitely the most famous lost city on the list today. However, Pompei was lost because of a natural disaster and not because of abandonment. It's considered to be the best preserved ancient Roman city, all thanks to the blankets of ash that cover the town when Mount Vesuvius erupted on August 24th, 79 AD. Volcanic debris fell upon the city, followed by clouds of insanely hot gases. Buildings were destroyed, the entire population was either crushed or suffocated, and Pompeii became covered in ash. Then, for centuries, Pompeii slept inside its preserved state until the 1700s, when the city was finally rediscovered. What's really amazing about the lost city of Pompeii is that even today, new discoveries are being made all the time. The city was so effectively ruined that archaeologists are still digging petrified human remains out of the rubble. It might be the longest disaster recovery mission in human history. At the time of Pompeii's destruction, there was somewhere around 20,000 people living in the city. Almost none of them escaped. And while people are usually interested in the ghosts of Pompeii, not many people know about its origins. But Pompeii was actually settled by Neolithic inhabitants thousands of years ago. The city wasn't cultured by the Greeks until they settled in the area in the 8th century BC. Pompeii was mostly ruled by a Greek homogeny until the region was captured by an Italic tribe in the 5th century. The first time Pompei is mentioned in the history books wasn't until 310 BC, when a Roman fleet landed at the port to try and subjugate the surrounding towns. Pompei teamed up with the local Italians and they revolted against Rome. However, the Romans won the battle and the south of Italy was absorbed into the Roman Empire. Number 7. Khor. Khor in Peru is an ancient city of pyramids. What's truly fascinating about Khor in Peru is that it's older than any other known civilization in the Americas. It's just as old as the pyramids of Egypt. According to the BBC, researchers are now thinking that the lost city of Khor could be a mother city, meaning it was a central city from which early humans branched out from. Keep in mind that in the earliest stages of human civilization, there were not very many of us. Civilization really only started in about 6 different places in the world. From these places, humans spread out over thousands of years. In the beginning, small family units turned into settlements, settlements turned into towns, and then a mother city was born. From that mother city, the rest of humanity spread out. Archaeologists now believe that Khor could have been the mother city of South America, basically the first major city ever on the continent. What's even more interesting is that even though Khor is 5,000 years old, archaeologists have found no trace of warfare. There were no mutilated remains and no weapons discovered. What archaeologists did find were musical instruments, drugs that may have been used as aphrodisiacs and hallucinogens, and other remains of one of the first peaceful societies in South America. Other than that, very little is known about this ancient city and its pyramids. Number 6. Tannis. Tannis was once the Egyptian capital, but you would never think that by looking at its remains. This lost city is a perfect example of how empires rise and fall and leave almost nothing behind. The city of Tannis was the capital of the 21st and the 22nd Egyptian dynasties. It was located on the Nile, making it a prosperous trade center. However, political upheaval made the city socially unstable, the waters of the Nile continued to rise, and Tannis was eventually forgotten. The actual ruins of Tannis eluded archaeologists until 1939, when a French researcher uncovered a burial tomb with a huge wealth of ancient artifacts. In fact, the royal tombs are all that remains of the once great city of Tannis. All other structures have been demolished and built over, all traces of the capital city have been erased, and the only thing remaining are a few ancient burial plots from thousands of years ago. Number 5. Mohenjo Daro. Mohenjo Daro is one of the oldest cities known to historians. Its ruins are currently located in southeastern Pakistan, and the city was only discovered in the 1920s. To this day, there are still huge questions surrounding the origins of the city. What type of culture thrived there? And why was it ultimately abandoned? Mohenjo Daro was part of the ancient Indus civilization, who thrived in the 3rd century BC. But they only built a few cities and didn't really leave the Indus Valley. They weren't nearly as explorative as the neighboring kingdom of Mesopotamia. Nonetheless, most researchers agree that Mohenjo Daro was far ahead of its time in terms of city structure. The layout of the city and its public buildings have indicated that the Indus Valley civilization was way ahead of several other ancient civilizations of the time. They were one of the first peoples to create a city in a grid format. This means that the designers of Mohenjo Daro actually had to plan and develop it much like any modern city would be developed today. They even had a public water supply and sewage system, with flushing toilets and large public baths. And this was thousands of years before people in America were struggling with the same problem. Number 4. Troy. Troy is certainly the most mythical lost city ever. There may have been more films, books, and other pieces of entertainment made about the city of Troy and its destruction than almost any other ancient city. But it's hard to separate myth from reality. Was the Trojan city truly defeated by a wooden horse in the middle of the night? And did the gods really have influence over the Trojan War? The answer to both these questions is probably not. According to Live Science, the Trojan War probably took place at the end of the Bronze Age, if it ever took place at all, right around 12,000 BC. The war was fought between the Trojans and the Greeks, with the Greeks unable to take the ancient city of Troy because the Trojans would simply push them back into the sea. But considering how long ago this happened, nobody knows exactly how the Trojan War was fought, or how exactly it ended, or if it even occurred. What we do know is that Troy has been inhabited for about 4,000 years. It was never just a single city either. Troy has been destroyed and rebuilt at least 10 times, with the new city being built over the ruins of the old city. Troy has also changed names numerous times throughout the centuries. And while its history is quite complex throughout 4,000 years of inhabitants, the main thing you need to know is that during the Middle Ages, Troy fell into serious decline. By the 13th century AD, nothing was left of Troy except for a small farming community. Today, it's nothing more than a small tourist attraction in modern-day Turkey. Number 3. Machu Picchu. Everyone knows about Machu Picchu. It's one of the most visited tourist attractions in the world. But ask just about any person standing with their selfie stick inside the lost city of Machu Picchu where exactly they are, they probably won't have a clue. That's because Machu Picchu is a mysterious window into the past with a complex and cryptic history. We know that the ancient Incan civilization was the most powerful in all of South America, and it was them who constructed Machu Picchu. But the exact purpose and meaning of why they built such a grand city so high in the Andean forest is still a bit of a mystery. Also, nobody is entirely sure why it was abandoned and forgotten. So far as we know, Spanish conquistadors never discovered the ancient city, and none of the Incan descendants ever gave away its whereabouts. It wasn't found again until 1911 by an explorer and historian. This was because by the time the Spanish arrived in Peru, Machu Picchu wasn't in use anymore. It had already been abandoned. That meant there were no roads leading to it, and because it was so high up in the mountains, there was no reason for anyone to go looking for it. As for the lost city of Machu Picchu itself, the city was constructed in such a way that the temples and slopes of the roofs would catch and reflect sunlight. The effect was like a shining city of gold. Number 2. Scott Bray. Scott Bray is older than the Egyptian pyramids, Machu Picchu, and Stonehenge. Way before many of the most advanced civilizations that we know of were constructing pyramids and massive temples, people were living in Scott Bray, which is located today on the island of Orkney in Scotland. It is considered to be the best preserved Neolithic settlement in all of Western Europe, and it was discovered in a very strange way. It all happened when a farmer discovered the settlement on his property. At first, the farmer didn't know what he had found, but after some serious excavations, he realized he had an entire city buried underground on his property. This turned out to be Scott Bray, built over 5,000 years ago and preserved beneath grass and sand for thousands of years after, making it just about as perfect as the day it was built. The city likely only had about 50 or 100 residents, living in crude habitations built of rock and sand. We have no idea why the place was abandoned, who lived inside the rock houses, or where they went after. Still, it's safe to say that Scott Bray is one of the oldest, most remote, and most truly mysterious lost cities on Earth. Number 1. Ciudad Perdida. Ciudad Perdida translates in English to lost city, making it quite literally a lost city. This ancient place is located in Colombia. It's older than Machu Picchu, and almost nobody visits it. This is because it's hidden deep in the Colombian jungle, near the Caribbean coast in the north. It was originally built by the Tairona people at least 1,000 years ago, and it was only rediscovered in the 1970s. That's how incredibly remote the lost city of Colombia really is. The reason Ciudad Perdida is often compared to Machu Picchu is because they look kinda similar. Both the ancient cities were built on hillsides and hidden within the dense South American forest. However, the lost city in Colombia is at least 600 years older than its Peruvian counterpart. There's also no proper way to reach the ruins. You can only find the lost city by hiking for several days through the perilous jungle. There is literally no other way to get there. Because of its remoteness, there have not been a lot of popular investigations of the ancient city. While we definitely know who built it, we still don't have much of an idea about how the civilization operated or why they abandoned their hillside city. According to CNN, in 2003, a group of tourists, while on their way to find the lost city, were kidnapped and held hostage for 100 days. This is one of the reasons why people have some understandable reservations about wandering into the Colombian jungle to find the legendary Ciudad Perdida. Have you visited any of these ancient cities? If so, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Number 10. The Plague Fort. Starting off our list of the most incredible abandoned places is somewhere known as the Plague Fort. Sounds a little creepy, right? Its proper name is actually Fort Alexander, but Russians know it as the island fortress where scientists battled death and disease throughout the 1800s. Fort Alexander was constructed on a platform of sand and concrete in the middle of the Gulf of Finland, and it was originally used to protect the mainland from a possible invasion. But the invasion never came, and Fort Alexander was used for a new purpose. That purpose of being a research laboratory to study the plague. As a remote, man-made island, Fort Alexander was the perfect place to research the bacterium which caused the Black Death, causing pathogens and develop a vaccine. This went on for a while, with more studies being done for cholera and tetanus, but the lab ultimately shut down in 1917. According to Live Science, the fort was then used by Russian Navy as a storage facility until it was entirely abandoned once again in the 1980s. There was a project to turn the fort into an entertainment complex, but it failed to happen. In the cold winters, the surrounding water starts to freeze over. During this time, many thrill seekers and urban explorers visit the Plague Fort in search of adventure. Number 9. The Old Idaho Penitentiary. The Old Idaho Penitentiary is probably the most haunted, abandoned location on today's list. The state penitentiary began its life in 1870 as a house with just a single cell. But over time, the penitentiary grew into a complex of buildings, with a large wall to fence in the inmates. As part of their punishment, inmates were forced to build the very walls that kept them prisoner. Between 1870 and 1970, over 13,000 convicts moved in and out of the Idaho State Penitentiary. According to the Travel Channel, at least 110 people died in total from illness, old age, and murder. Life at this eerie prison institution was brutal. There were at least 600 prisoners held there at any given time, stuffed into the most inhumane conditions imaginable. In fact, the prison didn't even have proper plumbing until the 1920s, causing many of the inmates to become sick with disease. Up until the 1970s, violence was also rampant. A riot broke out in 1973, the chapel was burned, and later on that year, the penitentiary was closed and abandoned. There were 11 executions in Idaho's history, 10 of them happened here. Hey, real quick, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Give this video a like and hit that subscribe button for more videos like these. Number 8. The Ghost Town of Ras Al Khaimah. The ghost town of Ras Al Khaimah is located in the United Arab Emirates. This abandoned village is shrouded in mystery, and with its bizarre history, it's pretty easy to see why. It was once a thriving community, but has since been taken over by the desert sands. Almost lost, though not quite, but it's also not on any tourist map. The small hamlet began life in the 14th century, constructed by a few local tribes, and it experienced a lot of changes throughout the years. By 1830, an estimated 200 people lived in the tiny village, with most of them working as fishermen. But by the 20th century, it grew to 2,000 people living there. But all of a sudden, the town was abandoned. Everyone just up and left. Most people believe that persistent tribal conflicts caused the villagers to pack up and leave in the 1960s. Some say the land is haunted with ancient ghosts, but nobody knows for sure why the village was so quickly abandoned. Today, the town is silent. The buildings are crumbling, and there isn't a soul to be seen. Number 7. The Island of the Lepers. Did you think all of the Greek islands were well-known hotspots for vacationers? Well, there is one mysterious abandoned island in Greece that almost nobody really knows about. It's called Spinalonga, nicknamed Island of Death, and it was once used as a leper colony. In the early 1900s, anyone afflicted with leprosy in Greece was sent to this single island. one time, there were about 400 lepers living in isolation. If you're not sure what leprosy is, it's a horrifying disease that causes sores to sprout all over one's skin, and back then there was no cure. It wasn't until the 1940s the first effective treatment was available. Once diagnosed with leprosy, people were often burned. They were shunned from their homes, and in the case of Greece, they were sent to this now abandoned island. But what's really disturbing about the island of lepers in Greece is that even though a treatment was discovered, Greece kept the leper colony operational all the way until 1957. This is not an ancient piece of history. People who were born in 1957 are still alive today. According to BBC Travel, it wasn't until 1957 that the colony was finally closed and the island was abandoned. Since then, the government has done its best to keep the island's grisly past a secret. Number 6. Ellis Island Immigrant Hospital. The Ellis Island Immigrant Hospital was one of the very first public health facilities in the United States. The hospital is located in New Jersey, built on a pair of man-made islands constructed from the leftover land that had been used for the Lexington Avenue subway line. One of the islands held the general hospital, while the other island had a contagious disease hospital. Both hospitals were pretty bleak places to go to, especially for the immigrants who arrived in America and were found to have diseases. When the newcomers would arrive, doctors would assess them, and if anything was amiss, a person would receive a chalk mark on their chest. Those with suspected mental defects were marked with an X. People with visible eye diseases were given an E, heart defects got an H, and pregnant women received a PG. This often meant a long and miserable stay at one of these facilities, followed by a ruthless deportation back to their own country. Children were often abandoned, families were torn in half, and couples were separated by the government. This was a horrendous time and a horrifying place in United States history. In 1930, the hospital was shut down, immigration restrictions were tightened, and then finally in 1954, both islands were abandoned. They were considered excess federal property and made off limits to the public. Today, the only way to visit these abandoned hospitals is through a limited tour. Number 5. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. The Lake Shawnee Amusement Park is, without a doubt, the creepiest place on today's list. The amusement park is currently abandoned, it's overgrown, and it's extremely hard to find in the dense backwoods of West Virginia. But what makes it truly fascinating is its disturbing history. In the late 1700s, the Clay family bought a parcel of land near Lake Shawnee. They used this land to create their new home. However, Native Americans were not too happy about it. In 1783, they attacked and killed 2 of the family's children, took a 3rd child captive, then burned him alive. A group of settlers then went after the Native Americans and killed several of them. 144 years later, the same land was turned into a small amusement park with a water slide and a dance hall. But they simply couldn't get rid of the stain of violence. Between 1927 and 1966, at least 6 people died at the Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. Perhaps the land is cursed because of its horrifying reputation, plus the fact that it was pretty much located in the middle of nowhere. The park was forced to shut down. Today, the Lake Shawnee Amusement Park is still abandoned. Number 4. The Port Arthur Penitentiary. Tasmania is not a place that's talked about very often, but today we're going to talk about the Port Arthur Penitentiary, one of the most brutal places in all of Australia. Australia began as a penal colony, and Port Arthur in Tasmania was basically the Alcatraz of Australia. Port Arthur started life in 1833 as a penal colony for Irish convicts. It was supposed to be the toughest prison in Australia and absolutely inescapable. The inmates there were forced to work at a timber station. In 1855, Port Arthur Penitentiary was expanded and turned into an even bigger prison. They even had their own island where the dead were buried, with 1,646 graves allegedly still there, and only 180 of them marked. But by 1877, Port Arthur was closed. The prison was abandoned, many of the prison houses were destroyed, and today all that remains of this once brutal facility is a decaying tourist attraction. But we haven't talked about the most notorious killer from Port Arthur. On April 28, 1996, a man named Martin Bryant entered the cafe at the Port Arthur Penitentiary tourist attraction and killed 12 people, wounded 10 more, then walked into the gift shop and killed 8 more people before walking out into the car park and opening fire on the tourists. At the end of the day, Martin Bryant killed 35 people and injured 23. Suffice to say, Port Arthur maintains its horrific legacy. Number 3. Atalaya Castle. Atalaya Castle in South Carolina is a mysterious mansion with 30 rooms and a whole lot of ghosts. The castle overlooks Huntington Beach State Park, and it was originally built as a Spanish-style compound by a rich couple. The woman of the house, Anna Huntington, enjoyed creating sculptures of animals. That's why at Atalaya Castle, rather than ballrooms and guest quarters, you will instead find bear pens and huge indoor studios. The mansion was built with space to hold wildcats, monkeys, and even stallions. Plus, there were dozens of rooms to hold the servants. However, the Huntingtons did not design any rooms for guests because they wanted to live in complete isolation. Basically, Atalaya Castle is a strange fortress set up on the seashore. It was a private getaway for eccentric philanthropists. Mr. Huntington died in 1955, and since then the mansion was subsequently abandoned. In 1960, the massive piece of property was leased to the state. And finally, in 1984, it became a National Historic Place and a public tourist attraction. You can still see the rooms where Anna Huntington created her strange yet eerily beautiful sculptures. Number 2. Abandoned Paris Railway. You can get almost anywhere in Paris in just a few minutes by taking the metro. But what a lot of people don't know is there is an abandoned railway line that circles the entire city of Paris. It actually predates the current Paris Metro by many years, and it was used as a connection between the exterior suburbs of the city and the main train stations. It apparently served urban travelers from between 1862 and 1934 before its abrupt abandonment. What's really remarkable is that construction on this railway line began in 1852 during the empire of Napoleon III. However, the 20th century Paris boom saw the circular railway become obsolete. Today, the railway is still there. It's mostly overgrown with flowers and other vegetation, not to mention all the graffiti and street art, but otherwise it's remained untouched by human hands and hidden out of sight along the edges of the City of Love. Number 1. The Quincy Mine. The Quincy Mine is not only one of the most historic places in Michigan, it's also the perfect place for ghost hunters and adventure-seeking enthusiasts. The mine was operational from between 1846 and 1945, plus it had a bit of mining activity in the 1970s. But since its early days of glory, the Quincy Mine has been abandoned and shuttered. There is pretty much nothing that remains of the old mining town today, other than a few empty wooden houses that look too scary to enter, and a handful of brick buildings, most of them without roofs, that haven't been used since the 30s and 40s. It's unclear exactly what caused everyone to leave this little hamlet. Probably when the mining stopped, everyone simply packed up and left. Today, it's an extremely bizarre place to visit. The old town is situated on the side of the highway. It's an entire ghost neighborhood, viewable from the road as you drive by. There doesn't appear to be any plans to demolish the town. Maybe it can be used as a location for shooting a horror film? Number 10. The Vampire of Venice. Italian researchers believe that they have discovered the remains of a lady vampire buried in Venice with a brick stuck between her jaw. The reason that the brick was placed between her jaw was probably to prevent her from biting people if she somehow managed to rise from the grave. According to an anthropologist from the University of Florence named Matteo Borini, the discovery was made on a small island in the Venice lagoon, and it's supporting the theory that vampires were truly feared during medieval Europe, especially during the Black Death. This was a time when many Europeans were dying from disease, and a lot of them blamed it on vampires. Before scientists discovered the germ theory of infectious diseases, the supernatural was often blamed for bad events, like the plague. Believe it or not, this was the first archaeological discovery that truly reconstructed the ritual that Europeans undertook to get rid of vampires. The skeleton came out of a mass grave filled with plague victims from around 1576. Plagues devastated Europe between 1300 and 1700, and this really helped to boost their belief in vampires. They really thought that sticking a brick inside of a dead person's mouth would stop them from turning into an evil bloodsucker. Number 9. The Tower of Skulls. In other horrifying archaeological news, a giant Aztec tower of human skulls, believed to be about 500 years old, was recently unearthed. In Mexico, this site is known as Huezompantli, first discovered in 2015. But recently, a new find added 119 skulls to the previously discovered 484 skulls. This has raised the total number of skulls used to build the horrifying tower to 603. All the skulls had been stuck together with mortar to create a literal Tower of Death. Researchers are saying that it was one of 7 skull towers that stood throughout the ancient Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, what is now modern-day Mexico City. The towers were first mentioned by Hernan Cortés in 1521, with most of them being destroyed by Spanish conquistadors shortly after their arrival. According to Rodrigo Bolaños, one of the biological anthropologists investigating the site, one of the most shocking revelations was that the new skulls came from not only men, but also women and children. As of now, it's unclear who the skulls belong to or why the skulls of children were added to this disturbing landmark. What do you think it was? To scare people? An honor to the gods? Let me know in the comments below, and then be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're new here. We have more awesome videos coming up. Number 8. The Voices of Mummies. In a paper published in 2020, researchers claimed that they managed to recreate the voice of an ancient Egyptian mummy that died 3,000 years ago. Researchers did this by recreating the mummy's vocal tract using special medical scanners, newly advanced 3D printing, and a unique electronic larynx tool. The authors of the scientific paper said that this technique allowed them to produce just one sound, a single vowel. And yet, this one vowel turned out to be one of the scariest sounds that researchers ever heard. It was a very close reflection of how the Egyptian priest Nesyamun, who they had chosen for their research, would have sounded. However, the sound was not exactly perfect because the mummy had already lost its tongue, and they were unable to recreate that. Researchers also said that their model wasn't enough to synthesize entire words or sentences. But, I mean, even just hearing a grunt or a groan from a mummy is pretty terrifying. Just imagine if this ancient priest did come back to life and started uttering scary sounds. Number 7. Strange New Dinosaur. A strange and terrifying new species of dinosaur has recently been discovered. This dinosaur lived about 110 million years ago along the shores of an old lagoon in what is now Brazil. It was from the Cretaceous period, and the dinosaur stood on 2 legs. It was about the size of a chicken, but it was horrifying. The dinosaur had an incredible mane of hair with 2 extremely strange structures protruding from its shoulders, kind of like really long horns. Scientists are saying that these almost ribbon-like protrusions were made from the same material that makes our hair and fingernails. This is called keratin, and it's the same kind of stuff that's responsible for rhino horns. Even though there are many strange dinosaurs out there, David Martill from the University of Portsmouth in England said that this is one unlike any other. It didn't even have proper feathers. It had something called proto-feathers, which were like a rudimentary type of feather first seen in small dinosaurs. Even though the fossils of this creepy monster, which is called Ubirajara jubatus, by the way, were first found in the 1900s. It wasn't until just recently that scientists were able to figure out the size and shape of the dino. And suffice to say, it has shocked the world of paleontology. Number 6. A brutal murder. A new discovery from 2020 has revealed an Anglo-Saxon skull with a very brutal story behind it. About 1100 years ago in medieval England, a teenage girl came to a sad and horrifying end. According to the evidence found on the skull, her lips were cut with a weapon and her nose was sliced off. She also may have been scalped. As of right now, nobody knows why the woman needed to be mutilated in such a vicious way. The only logical explanation is that the woman was being punished for something horrific that she did, or labeled horrific by lawmakers of the time. Lead researcher Gerard Cole said that the highly formalized nature of the woman's grotesque injuries suggests that she was paying some kind of penalty for acting out, or possibly being promiscuous, or even a religious heretic. She was clearly considered by that community and its leaders to be deviant, and they felt justified in torturing her. Truly savage and disturbing. As for how the skull was found, it was originally discovered in the 1960s at an excavation site in the small village of Oak Ridge. However, it wasn't until 2020 that the analysis of the skull was completed and published in the scientific journal Antiquity. Number 5. Nightmare Reef. A British ghost ship has recently been found by archaeologists in Mexico, and it's a pretty scary sight to behold. The British ship is about 200 years old, and it has been turning into an underwater nightmare ever since it was sunk for unknown reasons. Even though the wreck was originally spotted in the 1990s by a local fisherman, about 22 miles or 35 kilometers from the coast of Quintana Roo, the wreck wasn't explored for the first time until 2020 by divers with Mexico's National Archaeological Institute. The ship is currently sitting at the bottom of an ancient historical trade route that had gone between Colombia and Spain, with a short stop in Havana. But because of the size of the reef in this area, it was actually responsible for a lot of wreckages back in the 1800s. So far, there have been about 70 shipwrecks discovered in this one reef. It's a formidable graveyard of ancient vessels, and not a good place to dive if you're squeamish. Number 4. Murderous Chinese Emperor Tomb. The tomb of a horrifying and murderous Chinese emperor has just been discovered by archaeologists while excavating a mausoleum in China. Before this recent discovery, archaeologists were unsure who the mausoleum belonged to. However, they just discovered an artifact in 2021 that has confirmed a long-standing suspicion that the tomb belongs to Emperor Liu Zhi, who ruled between 146 and 168 AD. This guy is also known as Emperor Huan, and it's all because of a seal discovered with the emperor's successor's name on it, Emperor Liu Hong. The legend states that Liu Hong crafted a mausoleum for Liu Zhi after his death. But here's where the discovery gets scary. It's not about what was found, but rather about the guy who was buried inside the tomb. Emperor Liu Zhi ruled China during a time of great horror, when there was famine, when there were bloody rebellions, and when palace officials were being murdered on a semi-daily basis. Records from the 11th century claim that in response to the rebellions and the famines, the emperor killed and executed those closest to him. This would be the equivalent of the president murdering the people who worked in the White House because of an agricultural disaster in the country. Basically, Emperor Liu Zhi was a nightmare of a person. Number 3. The Mask of the Bat God. An ancient jade mask was found in Mexico, and it's one of the freakier artifacts that has ever been uncovered in the country. It's known as the Mask of the Bat God, and it was found inside the ruins of the Monte Alban pyramids near Oaxaca. The mask depicts the savage Zapotec bat god, and there's no denying it is incredibly sinister. Monte Alban was the heart of the ancient and very powerful Zapotec civilization, and bats were symbolic among their people for several reasons. The most key reason was that bats lived inside of caves, temples, and tombs, all places related to the sacred world of the dead. This ended up encouraging the Zapotec people to come up with their own god of the underworld, who just so happened to take on the form of a bat. Plus, bats were significant because they came out at night, and nightfall was symbolic because it represented death and spirits. As for the mask itself, it was probably created between 100 BC and 200 AD. It was crafted out of 25 separate pieces of jade and is currently on display at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. Number 2. Secret Tunnel of Death. With the help of some very skilled robots, archaeologists have just made a scary discovery of skeletons inside of a secret tunnel of death. This astonishing discovery was made beneath the Chavin de Huantar temple in Peru, dated about 3,000 years old. American and Peruvian archaeologists worked together with the latest robotic technology to identify 3 skeletons that had probably been murdered as part of a greater sacrifice. The robot was able to go into some very dark tunnels underneath the religious and administrative center of the ancient settlement, otherwise unreachable by archaeologists, and it was there that the bodies were found. The robots were designed by engineers at Stanford University, complete with lights and remote operation technology. It's now been estimated that there are about 35 interlinked tunnels beneath the complex of Chavin de Huantar, though the truth of what exactly they were used for and why the sacrifices of young people were left in the tunnels to rot is still a huge mystery that archaeologists need to solve. Number 1. Cocooned Mummy. An extraordinarily rare mud mummy has shocked and surprised archaeologists all over the world. Researchers on the project published their findings in the journal PLOS One, saying that the mud mummy is an unparalleled find, and that the mortuary treatment of encasing a dead person in mud has never been previously documented in all of the Egyptian history. Not a single other mud mummy has ever been found. And what's really scary about this mummy is that it looks as though the skeleton is wrapped up in some kind of cocoon. Some researchers are now saying that the mummy was likely wrapped in mud before being buried to emulate the intense embalming and mummification procedures used by the elite in ancient Egyptian society. That means that this mummy may have been interred with mud because mud was a lot cheaper than wrappings. It was also found that the mummy was put inside the wrong coffin. The mummy was male, dead since around 1207 BC, and yet he was found in a coffin designed for a female. It could very well be that whoever mummified this person was on a serious budget. Which of these amazing archaeological discoveries freaked you out the most? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 10. Mysterious Ship. Nothing is stranger to find in the desert than an ancient shipwreck. But that's exactly what was found in the Namibia desert just a few years ago. Diamond miners discovered a ship that sank 500 years ago after they drained a man-made lagoon on the coast of Namibia. And while shipwrecks are frequently discovered along this area, which is commonly known as Africa's Skeleton Coast, this ship was special. It was loaded with around $13 million worth of shining gold coins. Some archaeologists are calling this the most significant shipwreck ever found in the country. One of the reasons it was lost for so long is because it was literally underneath the sea floor. According to Fox News, the mining workers had to use bulldozers to create the man-made lagoon by pushing back the sand at the coast to create a sort of seawall. They then had to pump out the seawater from the giant hole they dug. And that was when they found the wreckage. It was literally buried beneath the desert sands. The ship that was found had been built in the 16th century. When archaeologists arrived, they knew something special had been discovered. But it was no easy task to excavate the site. The mining workers had to use 2 dozers and a fleet of trucks just to keep the lagoon dry for long enough for archaeologists to dig up some treasures. Luckily, they found the treasure chest on day 6. The archaeologists literally pulled out a giant chest filled with Spanish and Portuguese gold coins from the sand. Later, the ship was identified as the Bom Jesus, which literally translates to the Good Jesus. It was a Portuguese ship that went missing about 500 years ago while on its way to India. In addition to the mass amount of gold, the ship was also loaded with ivory, 44,000 pounds of copper ingots, and lots of tin. Number 9. Hidden Desert Pool. Deep in the desert of San Bernardino County is located an unexpected luxury. Back in 2014, a small and mysterious pool showed up in the middle of the desert. It was apparently created by an artist who purchased a small plot of land and decided to build a luxury pool in the absolute middle of nowhere. But what was really interesting about this strange desert pool was that it was considered a social experiment. The only way to find the pool was to stop by an art center in West Hollywood and pick up the key to access it. When you picked up the key, you were given coordinates that led you deep into the sandy wasteland of the Mojave. You then had to either hike or drive all the way out to where the pool was. It was a long and exciting adventure to reach a shallow pool completely isolated from the rest of the world. But as a social experiment, it was kind of a failure. This random pool in the middle of the desert, located among shrubs, snakes, and lizards, only lasted a handful of months.
The first visitors to the pool cared for it and used it properly, but eventually too many people learned of its location. Within a short period of time, the public had destroyed their own pool, and now all that's left is a sad reminder of how hopeless the public really is, sitting trashed and dirty in the Mojave Desert. Have you ever found a hidden swimming pool? What kind of mischief did you get into there? Was it a drained pool that you used for skateboarding? Or did you use it for a romantic tryst? Tell me about your adventures in the comment below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic for more fun and exciting videos just like this one. Number 8, the Atari Graveyard. In New Mexico, near the desert city of Alamogordo, a strange stockpile of ancient video games has been recovered from its burial site. The story behind the games is incredible. It began in 1983 when Atari paid Alamogordo to dump nearly 800,000 video games into its city landfill. But after '83, people mostly forgot about the incident. Nobody could remember where the video games were buried. Then, over 30 years later, when it became clear some of the buried video games could have been worth a lot of money, people decided it was time to start looking for them. After doing quite a bit of digging, the Atari Graveyard was eventually found 30 feet under the ground, buried inside of the trench. The city of Alamogordo then dug up the games that they had originally buried and sold the treasures for nearly $100,000. According to CNN Business, they sold nearly 900 games, including a single copy of what is still considered to be the worst video game in history. I'm of course talking about E.T. the Extraterrestrial from 1982. This one game alone sold for $1,535. Number 7, ancient petroglyphs. On the windswept Chilean coast at the edge of the Atacama Desert, scientists have discovered fantastic petroglyphs from about 1,500 years ago that depict the slaughter of a variety of sea creatures. These new petroglyphs are showing how ancient hunters used harpoons and rafts to hunt unthinkable marine beasts. According to the petroglyphs, 1,500 years ago in Chile, the native population was hunting sea lions, swordfish, sharks, and even whales. The pictures were painted in iron oxide on the sides of massive boulders, and there were hundreds of scenes found displaying epic battles between whales and humans. This new archaeological evidence is suggesting that the society that lived in the valley between the ocean and the desert may have been one of the first specialized civilizations on Earth to hunt marine animals. They had extremely sophisticated fishing techniques, including intricate fish hooks crafted from shell, bone, and cactus spines. They even used sea lion skin to make their rafts. These incredible depictions were discovered at a new site in El Medano, and it's pretty boggling to imagine a handful of guys in sealskin raft hunting giant whales with spears. And yet, that's exactly what happened back then. For anyone who thinks whale hunting only cropped up in the 19th century, think again. It turns out that humans have been hunting whales ever since we could build boats. Number 6, the Nevada Clown Motel. Perhaps the creepiest thing ever discovered in the desert is the Clown Motel of Nevada. It's absolutely horrifying. This hotel is located at the edge of the desert, it's decorated with thousands of freaky clowns, and it's positioned conveniently beside an abandoned graveyard. If you're the kind of person who likes creepy things, then there's nothing better than a haunted clown motel complete with a cemetery. And even though this might seem like a place straight out of a Stephen King novel, it's 100% legit. But the clientele at this strange place may surprise you. First, the Clown Motel primarily caters to bikers and truckers. Also, the cemetery holds the remains of local miners who worked in the area decades ago. There is absolutely no connection between the clowns and the graves. They just so happen to be sitting next to each other. Number 5, World War II plane. There is a World War II airplane sitting in the middle of the Sahara Desert. It had remained untouched for the last 7 decades before a Polish oil worker stumbled across it completely by accident. The oil worker had been on an expedition in the Egyptian desert, where he came upon the aircraft sitting in the sand 200 miles from any town. But the story of how it crashed into the desert is far more fascinating than the story of it being found. While the plane is still in relatively good shape, it's still just an old piece of war machinery lost to the sands of time. But until 1942, the fighter plane had served its purpose. That is, until it crashed into the Sahara Desert and the pilot was lost. According to Business Insider, the pilot was likely only 24 years old at the time. It's also believed that the pilot, likely someone named Sergeant Dennis Copping, survived the initial crash. A parachute discovered on the side of the wreckage appeared to have been used as a shelter from a horrifying desert sun before the sergeant ultimately succumbed to heat and thirst. The pilot had been a member of a fighter unit based in Egypt during World War II. He had been flying the airplane to a British airbase to get it repaired when it crashed. It looks like those repairs will finally get done, as the RAF Museum in London is planning to recover and restore the aircraft to put it on display. Number 4. Utah Evaporation Pools. The Utah Evaporation Pools are some of the most spectacular things you can find in the entire state. Unfortunately, they are not natural. These pools are special evaporation ponds used in the production of potassium chloride, but they look like a natural phenomenon. These pools are located in the middle of an otherwise barren landscape in Utah, and they have captured the world's attention because of their beautiful electric blue color. These pools have created an almost otherworldly landscape, like something you might see on an alien planet. However, you under no circumstance should ever try to swim inside a Utah evaporation pool. That's because you would likely shrivel up from all the salt and dehydrate your body. The sun works to evaporate the water inside of the ponds, and after about 300 days, all of the liquid brine turns into salt and crystals of potassium. These pools are basically just stranger versions of mines, since the potash comes from the basin underneath the ground, and the potassium is dissolved by pumping hot water down through drilled wells and into the mines. The brine is then drawn out to fill up the above-ground pools, where the water turns a magnificent shade of blue. Number 3. Organic substances on Mars. Our next discovery does not even come from our own planet. However, you can't deny that Mars is basically one giant desert. And even though Mars is a seemingly barren wasteland, there have been some pretty impressive discoveries made on its surface. For example, in 2018, NASA released an article stating that they found ancient organic material on the face of the red planet. NASA's Curiosity rover, just a few years ago, found evidence preserved in rock on the fourth planet from the Sun that suggests Mars supported ancient alien life. This is literally proof of alien life, but for whatever reason, it seems to have been swept under the rug ever since NASA released the information. Either nobody wants to talk about it, or somebody doesn't want you to hear about it. In any case, the findings are real. The rover discovered organic molecules inside of sedimentary rock dated to be about 3 billion years old. The robot also found seasonal variations that seem to indicate that there had once been real seasons on the red planet. This means that billions of years ago, Mars could have hosted an entire planet of animal and life forms, with winters, summers, and everything in between. This is a fantastic biological discovery on another planet, and it goes to show that even without human intervention and global warming, there is nothing that can stop a planet from turning from a cornucopia of life into a barren wasteland where nothing lives. It's just the cycle of the universe. Number 2. Mystery Monster. A bizarre creature has been spotted on camera strolling through the desert, and people can't decide whether it's a goat or chupacabra. People also can't decide whether it's real or fake. In the video, you can see the mysterious beast for just a few seconds before it disappears behind a bush. And unfortunately, the footage is quite fuzzy. The thing in the video could just be an extremely ugly man walking slowly through the desert. However, it definitely looks more like an alien or some kind of horrifying hairless ape. And even though some people claim the monster could be the chupacabra, it's extremely unlikely, considering the chupacabra only has ever been spotted in Central and South America. Portugal is quite a ways off from there, and unless the chupacabra saved its air miles, it probably didn't make it to Europe. Unfortunately, we still don't know what this monster is. Even though the footage has been shared and discussed by several different news agencies, nobody can identify the beast or even put forth a rational explanation for what was seen in this remote region of the Portuguese desert. Number 1. The Atacama Desert Alien. You may have seen the photographs of the tiny alien skeleton discovered in the Chilean desert, nicknamed Ata. Ata's mummified skeleton was found about 15 years ago. Ever since, it has been a giant source of controversy. Ata's skeleton is only 6 inches or 15 centimeters tall, and yet the bones have the consistency of a child around 8 years old. The obvious conundrum here is that no 8-year-old child is going to be only 6 inches tall. It doesn't make any sense. And yet, the skeleton is real. According to the report from CNN, Ata's strange skeleton also possesses a long and abnormally angular skull with slanted eye sockets and not enough ribs. This has led people to speculate that the skeleton belongs to an extraterrestrial form of life. But of course, that is not the case. Ata's skeleton has been investigated thoroughly ever since its discovery, with researchers doing a full genetic analysis of the skeleton's DNA. They discovered Ata was definitely human, but that Ata suffered from a disturbing series of mutations. Ata had all kinds of horrible deformities, such as skeletal dysplasia, scoliosis, and other musculoskeletal issues. This caused what would have otherwise been a completely normal human to turn into a tiny preserved alien fossil. Of course, Ata would not have been walking around. The tiny person was likely dead upon birth, and it's likely that the birth could have had dangerous consequences for the mother. But the important takeaway here is that Ata's tiny skeleton is not proof of alien life. It's sad, but it's true. Which of these crazy discoveries do you think is the strangest? How do you feel about monsters and aliens being found in the desert? Number 10. Tornado Alley on the move. One of the most infamous and frightening natural occurrences in the United States of America is Tornado Alley. It is the top area in the US for tornadoes. According to a report from USA Today, an average of around 40 people die from tornadoes every year in the 9 southeastern states that comprise Tornado Alley. Out of all of these states, Alabama has the highest death toll, with an average every year of about 14. As for just how many deadly tornadoes the U.S. experiences every year, according to the National Severe Storms Laboratory, it's about 1,200. Not all of these storms cause death, but they are definitely worrisome. But get ready to be even more worried. According to a new study investigating the future trends of tornadoes in the United States, it seems that Tornado Alley is on the move. There is a trend happening that shows tornado frequency increasing throughout Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, and even Indiana in the coming years. This could have devastating consequences because the Mid-South region of the United States is filled with mobile homes, expanding populations, and they don't have the experience needed to survive an increase in storms. In the coming years, we could see Tornado Alley sweep north and east, destroying everything in its path. Number 9. The Everlasting Storm. Nature is a terrifying thing, and one of the most frightening and beautiful events in all of nature has to be a lightning storm. And while we've all seen lightning at one point in time or another, you've never seen lightning like the everlasting storm going on in Venezuela. There is a lake in the country where thousands of lightning strikes occur every single hour, roughly 28 times a minute. This happens where the Catatumbo River meets Lake Maracaibo. In this very spot, there are about 260 lightning storms each year, with each storm lasting for around 9 hours. It may not actually be everlasting, but it might as well be. This place is recognized in the Guinness Book of World Records for having the highest concentration of lightning ever, with the most spectacular lightning storms happening around October. But what causes such dramatic storms? And can a person survive a visit to this place? According to the report from the BBC, scientists believe that the conductivity of the air over the lake is because of a vast field of methane below. The theory hasn't been proved, but it is highly probable. As for whether you could survive the devastation of this place, you would be fine as long as you didn't bring a lightning rod with you, and if you were completely coated in rubber. Number 8. Underwater Waterfall. There is a small island nation called Mauritius, located in the middle of the Indian Ocean, about 1,200 miles or 1,931 kilometers from the continent of Africa. And while this small island has some mysteries of its own, with a long history of colonization, it has a natural phenomenon that is one of the most dangerous and yet most fascinating in the world. It's also something you've probably never seen before. It's commonly known as an underwater waterfall, and when viewed from above, it appears as though the sea around the island is flowing into itself, or almost like it's falling off the earth. The underwater waterfall is actually a runoff of sand deposits slipping into the ocean. Because of how clear the water is here, you'll be able to see a long way down from the top of the slope, where a rough 12,000 foot or 3,658 meter drop leads from the shelf of the island into a great abyss. And the sand flowing into it makes the abyss appear as though it's an otherworldly waterfall flowing into the great beyond. It's definitely more of an optical illusion than an actual underwater waterfall, but it's still extremely dangerous. The water is more shallow above the abyss, but one wrong move could send you splashing into the danger zone. If you're not a strong swimmer, you may end up flowing with the sand down into a watery grave. Hey, real quick, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Give this video a like and hit that subscribe button for more videos like these. Number 7. The Death Cap Mushroom. The Death Cap Mushroom is the deadliest mushroom in the entire world. It has been reported that the death cap mushroom kills and poisons more people each and every year than any other known mushroom on Earth. The scientific name for this mushroom is Amanita phalloides, but death cap honestly makes more sense. This is because those who accidentally eat a death cap mushroom often die. It's not a fast or pleasant death either. Symptoms don't begin for between 6 and 24 hours. Then comes the abdominal cramps, the puking, and the painful diarrhea. At first, someone sickened by death cap mushrooms might just think they have the stomach flu. Because of this, they might not seek treatment. But sure enough, the poison from the mushroom makes itself known eventually. The poison will destroy a person's liver. It binds to the enzyme that is responsible for creating new proteins, and this means that cells won't be able to function. Your liver will quickly fail, and without immediate treatment, your other organs will follow. You'll then slip into a coma and die. It also doesn't take much to kill you. Just a few mouthfuls are enough to do the job. What's even scarier is that according to many people who have been poisoned and survived, the death cap mushroom is extremely delicious. And be prepared to be even more frightened. The death cap mushroom originally came to North America from Europe, but is now present on every continent, except of course for Antarctica. Next time you're mushroom picking, you better be extremely careful. Number 6. Snake Island. Snakes are some of the most horrifying things found anywhere in nature. Specifically, the venomous pit viper is one of the all-time most fearsome serpents slithering around the world. I don't know what nature was thinking when she decided to create Snake Island, a small piece of land about 93 miles or 150 kilometers from the coast of Brazil, completely filled with venomous vipers. The island is untouched by human hands, without a single building on it. According to Atlas Obscura, there are at least 1 to 5 snakes per 10 square feet, or 3 meters. This is literally terrifying, as you basically can't walk more than a few feet without stepping on a unique species of pit viper known as the golden lancehead. It's been reported that these snakes are responsible for at least 90% of snake-related fatalities in Brazil. They aren't only wildly dangerous, with venom that acts fast to melt the flesh right off your bone, but they also grow to be about 1.5 feet or 0.4 meters in length. The island is crawling with them. But why are they there? That is the big question. The truth is that they like the island because it's a migratory stopping point for seabirds. The snakes evolved to kill the seabirds that land in the trees on the island before they can fly away. This is why their venom acts so quickly. Number 5. The Manchineel Tree. The Manchineel Tree is the deadliest and most dangerous tree in the world. The tree has horrifying fruit known locally as poison guava. The trees grow naturally throughout the Caribbean and parts of Central and South America, and in Spanish they are known as Árbol de la Muerte, which translates literally to Tree of Death. According to the Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, every single part of this tree is deadly poisonous. It's not only dangerous to eat the fruit, which can burn your throat in a rather unpleasant way and poison you, but it's also dangerous to get anywhere near the tree. Let me tell you why. This tree produces a milky sap, just like any other tree. The only difference is that if you touch it, it will burn your skin. Just placing your hand on the manchineel tree will cause your flesh to erupt with blisters and sores. This thing is not messing around. And even more horrifying is the fact that if you stand under the canopy of the tree while it's raining, the diluted sap will come down in the raindrops and burn your skin as though you were standing under an acid rain cloud. Then there is the burning of the manchineel tree. If for some crazy reason you decided to use some of this wood in your fireplace, the fumes would cause your eyes to become inflamed and could even blind you. And if you were silly enough to inhale it, you don't even want to imagine what would happen to the inside of your body. Number 4, shipworm trees and scary clams. Today we're looking at the most dangerous things in nature, and a strange invertebrate known as a shipworm is first on the list. The shipworm isn't actually a worm, even though it resembles the slimy little creatures. It's a clam, only it has a skinny tube of flesh growing out of its casing that can grow up to 2 feet or 0.6 meters in length. What makes shipworms so strange is that they burrow deep into wood. This is bizarre for a number of reasons. First off, shipworms have somehow evolved to rely on wood from the land. Swarms of them are often found buried deep into ship hulls, broken piers, or even wooden dikes. There have been shipworm infestations all throughout history, from the 1700s when shipworms destroyed over 30 miles or 48 kilometers of dikes in the Netherlands, and even in the 1900s when a shipworm infestation caused billions of dollars in damage in San Francisco Bay by destroying the docks. These worms burrow into the wood and slowly eat it away, potentially putting any wooden thing in the water around them in danger. According to science, shipworms are likely involved in areas thick with mangrove trees. Mangrove trees are some of the only types of trees able to grow in salt water, and it could be that the clams evolved by eating the wood of the mangrove tree, but soon found themselves feasting on ships and other man-made structures. Number 3, the Naruto whirlpools. Most people probably haven't seen a real whirlpool before, and who could blame them? This natural phenomenon is not something that can be viewed from just any beach around the world. They are extremely special forces of nature that can be highly dangerous. And one of the most dangerous and most stunning whirlpools in the world is actually located in Japan. It's known as the Naruto Whirlpool. And no, it has no relation to the famous anime character. It's located in the Naruto Strait and is created by massive volumes of water that shift between the Pacific Ocean and the Inland Sea. With the changing of the tides combined with the strange underwater geography of the strait, the whirlpool is born. And if you were sucked into it, you would surely drown in a maelstrom of horror. The Naruto Whirlpool occurs every 6 hours with the shifting of the tides. What's really fascinating about this natural danger is that you can actually see it anytime you want. It's visible once in the morning and in the afternoon for about 2 hours. The whirlpool often varies in size depending on how intense the tides are that particular day. On average, you can expect the whirlpool to be roughly 60 feet or 18 meters in diameter. If you were to fall into it, there would be no getting out. Number 2, Land of the Man-Eaters. The most powerful natural predator on Earth right now is undoubtedly the tiger. It's an apex predator that has evolved through millions of years to become a nearly indestructible force of nature. And depending on where you live in the world, tigers are still things to be feared. Specifically, the Bengal tigers that live in the biggest mangrove forest on Earth, which straddles the border between Bangladesh and India. This area is known as the Sundarbans, and according to the BBC, it is home to about 60 tiger attacks per year, with only about half of the people surviving to tell their story. While we might enjoy looking at tigers from the other side of the glass at our local zoo, the people who live on the northern shore of the Bay of Bengal literally live in fear of their lives every single day, as these tigers stalk, hunt, and kill fishermen, small children, and women with absolutely no discretion. It's true that there are natural wonders on Earth that are terrifying and dangerous, from lightning storms to rioting volcanoes. But there's just something about a fully grown tiger going on a mad rampage in a small village and tearing people apart with its claws and teeth that is inherently frightening. If you don't want to be eaten by a tiger, I suggest you stay away from the Sundarbans. Number 1, the volcano storm. There are 2 very dangerous natural occurrences on our planet. And yes, there are also dangerous trees, animals, and plants. The world can definitely be a scary place. But when you put together a lightning storm and a volcanic eruption, you have the most devastating force of nature ever. This exact thing happened during an eruption in Chile, when the Calbuco volcano erupted and merged with a lightning storm. It just so happened that a photographer named Francisco Negroni had been there at the exact right moment to capture the image of the lightning spiraling around the ash and fire as it was spat from the mouth of the volcano. The photo was titled "The Perfect Fear." If you're wondering how this happened, it was actually a combination of different elements. When the internal forces of the volcano collided with the outside world, it was a positive and negative charge colliding, almost like what happens to create a static electric charge. This resulted in a sudden burst of lightning. Just imagine being anywhere near such a violent storm. You would choke on the smoke, be burned by the lava, and electrocuted by the lightning. This is definitely the most frightening expression of nature that has ever happened. Thanks for watching. Which one of these dangerous natural occurrences scare you the most? Number 10, Cassius. One of the largest crocodiles in captivity right now is about 18 feet long, or 5.5 meters, 2,200 pounds, or 1,000 kilograms, and around 111 years old. That's right. This crocodile is over a century old. His name is Cassius, and if given the chance, he would definitely eat his owner. A man named George Craig, 84 years old, has been feeding Cassius for the last almost 30 years at the sanctuary he owns in Australia. George used to be a crocodile hunter, whom many refer to as the real-life Crocodile Dundee. But what's really amazing about this relationship is that even though the crocodile definitely recognizes George after 30 years together, George has no illusions about how dangerous the animal is. George's grandson recently told Cater's news agency that George is very much aware that if Cassius had the chance, he would lash out and eat George just like a snack. Coincidentally, George actually saved Cassius from hunters in the Northern Territory of Australia in 1987. Just 1 year after Crocodile Dundee came out in theaters. Even with one leg missing and part of his tail gone, the locals were concerned because Cassius was attacking boats. But thankfully, now all he attacks are the snacks that George feeds him every day. Do you know anyone who has a dangerous pet? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're new here. Number 9, fatal attacks. Villagers in the Philippines recently captured one of the largest crocodiles ever recorded. This came after a series of fatal attacks in which a 21-foot or 6.5 meter saltwater crocodile near the Agusan del Sur wetland on the island of Mindanao terrorized local farmers. A 3-week hunt followed the disappearance of a farmer who was assumed to have been eaten by this beast of a crocodile. Wildlife authorities actually had to use chicken, dog meat, and even pork to lure the croc out of hiding. The giant crocodile was taken alive, its stomach was examined, but no human remains were found inside. After it was captured, the giant crocodile was transported to a nearby nature park in Bunawan, where the locals are hoping to draw in a large tourist crowd. As for its size, it's about 3 feet longer than Cassius,
the previous largest croc captured and held as a pet. Cassius was listed by the Guinness World Records as being the largest saltwater crocodile in captivity, though obviously this one is quite a bit larger. Why are so few crocodiles held captive, especially the larger ones? It's because many of the biggest crocodiles ever are killed in the wild after they become a threat to society. Number 8. Big Croc Down Under. The second largest crocodile ever caught in Australia has recently been dragged out of the water by a wrangler named Matt Wright in the Northern Territory. This is a part of Australia that is infamous for having killer crocodiles. This huge monster is estimated to be 18 feet and 3 inches long, or 5.5 meters. Even though the reports haven't been 100% verified yet, those involved are confident that they've got the second largest croc ever caught in the land down under. And they would know, considering Matt Wright is not only a croc expert, but the star of the National Geographic series Outback Wrangler. He's also a chopper pilot and animal expert. To be honest, this guy sounds like quite an adventurer, and I would love to spend a few days living his lifestyle. The largest crocodile ever caught in Australia is only a few inches longer than this new one, named Dominator. However, Dominator was never officially weighed, making things a bit tricky. Until the pros can get in and do some measuring, we won't know who exactly holds what title. All we know for sure is that Matt Wright caught one seriously large river monster. Number 7. Lolong. Lolong used to hold the title of the world's largest crocodile in captivity. Lolong lived in the Philippines, and he didn't hold the title for long. After Lolong was captured by angry locals who were sick of him terrorizing their waters, his length was measured to be approximately 20 feet and 2 inches, or about 6 meters. He quickly stole the title of biggest croc from Cassius, but then everything went horribly wrong. When it comes to giving out official titles, Guinness World Records requires that the animals must be living in captivity for somewhere between 3 and 6 months. The animal must also be in good health. Lolong survived in captivity in the Philippines for 6 months, was recorded to be in good health, was measured to be the longest croc in captivity, and was given the title. This happened in late 2011. It was even documented in a special program by National Geographic Wild. But just 2 years later, on February 10th, 2013, Lolong died at the age of 50. Everyone was extremely saddened by the crocodile's death, including the owner of Cassius. Even though the record reverted back to Cassius with Lolong dead, nobody was happy about it. Craig Mead, who was part of the documentary team filming the life of Lolong, told Guinness World Records that Lolong was a superb example of nature at its finest and was an awe-inspiring animal. He will be missed. Number 6. Giant Florida Gator. In Venus, Florida, a giant alligator weighing 800 pounds or 350 kilograms was recently killed after it went on a spree of terror and ate a bunch of local cattle. The gator was actually captured by some farmers working at Out West Farms Incorporated. According to the local news station, the alligator was harvested while farmers participated in a guided gator hunt on their farm. It turned out to be nearly 15 feet or 4.5 meters in length, and one of the farmer's sons even posed with the enormous alligator hanging from the bucket of a John Deere tractor to showcase the victory. This was a behemoth of a reptile, and it had been skulking through the center of Florida, which is an area rich in agriculture, particularly sugarcane and cattle. As you can imagine, the last thing farmers need is a 15-foot gator snacking on all their precious cows. Alligators are technically cousin species to crocodiles, and the difference is in where they live and the shape of their jaws. Florida has alligators and Australia has crocodiles. Number 5. The albino crocodile. An albino seawater crocodile named Michael Jackson recently caused havoc in the Adelaide River of Australia when it killed a 57-year-old fishing enthusiast while he tried to pull up his line. This guy had just taken up fishing recreationally near his home in the Northern Territory and had gotten in the habit of going out with his wife along the river to fish, where hundreds and thousands of crocodiles make their home. The incident occurred when the man waded into the water to unhitch a line that had gotten snagged.
As he waded into the water, his wife was packing up the car. She then heard him scream, "Oh my God, I'm dead!" And by the time she turned around, the crocodile had already eaten him. This was one massive albino crocodile. It was killed after the incident, and its giant skull was preserved, and even brought into Darwin Court, where an inquest into the death was being carried out. Court records indicate that the albino crocodile was nearly 15 feet or 4.5 meters in length. And according to coroner Greg Kavanaugh, there's a serious concern that crocodiles are eating more and more people, especially these giants that live in the Adelaide River. Number 4, the Savannah King Croc. In 1957, a giant crocodile was captured and killed in Australia, and the photograph of this massive beast has been seen around ever since. The caption claims that the crocodile was 28 feet or 8.5 meters in length. However, people have been doubting the authenticity of the photograph because that seems way too big, even for the most legendary of crocodiles. According to Snopes, the image is 100% real. However, the date of the photograph is wrong. And even though it looks so big in the picture, the crocodile was not actually 28 feet in length. The photograph was actually taken in 1914 on the shores of the Roper River in the Northern Territory of Australia. Absolutely nobody knows where the photograph came from, but we do know the name of the hunters were Miss Cross and Mr. Joint. Mr. Joint was apparently a reverend who did missionary work in Australia during the early 1900s and also hunted crocodiles. As for why this huge crocodile probably wasn't 28 feet, it's just not a thing that feels likely. There has never in the entire history of humankind been a recorded crocodile that large. The biggest crocodile ever recorded was only about 20 feet long, or 6 meters. To imagine a monster so much longer would simply be ridiculous. Still, this Savannah King crocodile was probably quite terrifying and gigantic, and it's no surprise to think that the people who captured him got a little carried away when measuring. Number 3, the Swamp King. Scientists have recently discovered proof that there was a very intimidating crocodile that lived about 5 million years ago in what is now Australia. Scientists have nicknamed this giant crocodile Swamp King, and they're saying that it probably preyed on ancient giant kangaroos. All of this information came about because of a skull that was unearthed in Australia back in the 1980s. However, it wasn't until recently that analysis was able to prove that the skull belonged to a brand new species and new genus. But here's where things get really interesting. According to the report in the Daily Mail, the average size of this prehistoric crocodile was only 16 feet or 5 meters. That's not actually that large. However, scientists are saying that the crocodile had a very heavy skull, a whole lot of power, and looked exactly like the largest living saltwater crocodiles on Earth today, except hulked out on an extreme diet. The crocodile was named Paludrex vincenti after Jeff Vincenti, the fossil collector who initially found the huge skull about 200 miles or 300 kilometers northwest of the city of Brisbane. In Latin, Paludrex means Swamp King. Number 2, Gustav the Killer. A killer crocodile was discovered in the second largest lake in Africa, and to this day he remains a nightmare in the minds of the locals. His name is Gustav, and each time he's spotted, somebody dies. Gustav lives in Lake Tanganyika, the longest saltwater lake in the entire world. It crosses the boundaries of Tanzania and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and even Tanzania and Zambia. This is a huge place, so it's no wonder that rough estimates have placed Gustav as being almost 20 feet in length, or 6 meters. Some sources claim that he has killed at least 300 people, but of course these have not been substantiated. Professionals estimate that he is anywhere between 60 and 100 years old, and despite countless attempts to murder this crocodile, he has always escaped unharmed. For example, he has been shot at least 3 times. He has also been blamed with the death of someone working at the Russian embassy who had been bathing in the nearby waters. A French hunter named Patrice Fay even tried tracking down and killing the crocodile in 2010, but he couldn't get his sights on him.
Patrice even suggested to the BBC that Gustave is too smart and its survival instincts are too strong, suggesting that this enormous and murderous killer crocodile will probably never be caught. And guess what? It still has not been captured. Number 1. Sarcosuchus. The Sarcosuchus is a distant relative of our living crocodilians, thriving between 122 and 112 million years ago. It was significantly larger than any current saltwater crocodile on Earth today. This literal beast was likely over 31 feet long, or 10 meters, and seriously dangerous. Its remains were first discovered by a French paleontologist in the Sahara Desert, including the skull, a bunch of teeth, and even some vertebrae. But a full skull was not found until 1964, and even then, it wasn't until 2012 that the anatomy of the Sarcosuchus became known to science. This was after an expedition of American paleontologists uncovered 6 new specimens in the desert. These creatures had telescoped eyes and very long snouts, with 35 teeth in each side of the upper jaw. They would have looked like a mix between a standard saltwater crocodile and a gharial, only much larger than anything you could ever imagine. You should be happy that these are not the volatile reptiles skulking through backyards in Florida. Forget eating your pets, the Sarcosuchus would eat your car. What's the biggest crocodile you've ever seen? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and come back soon.